The most catastrophic event in human history, an event so devastating that it wiped out entire civilizations, reshaped continents, and left scars on our planet that we can still detect today. For over a century, mainstream science has dismissed it as myth. Religious fundamentalists have claimed it without proof. But what if I told you that cutting-edge geology, archaeology, and even DNA analysis are now revealing something extraordinary? The Great Flood didn't just happen. It happened exactly when ancient texts said it did. Exactly where they said it occurred. And with a magnitude that makes our worst natural disasters look like gentle summer rain. We thought we were dealing with scattered folklore and Bronze Age stories. We were completely wrong. In the last 2 decades, evidence has been mounting from the most unexpected places. From the bottom of the Black Sea, where marine archaeologist Robert Ballard discovered settlements that were drowned 7,600 years ago. From Greenland ice cores that show a massive freshwater pulse into the Atlantic. From genetic studies revealing a population bottleneck that occurred precisely when flood myths claim the deluge happened. But here's what makes this discovery truly disturbing. The flood wasn't gradual. It wasn't a slow rise over centuries. The evidence suggests it happened in a matter of weeks, possibly days. Imagine waking up one morning to find your entire world disappearing under hundreds of feet of water, with no warning, no escape, and no hope of return. Tonight, we're going to examine the proof, not from ancient texts or religious arguments, but from the Earth itself, from satellite imagery that reveals massive underwater formations, from sediment cores that tell the story of unprecedented deluges, from archaeological sites that show clear evidence of sudden abandonment and catastrophic flooding across multiple continents simultaneously. Dr. Bruce Mass, an environmental archaeologist at Los Alamos National Laboratory, has spent decades correlating flood myths from around the world. His conclusion: the consistency of these accounts across isolated cultures suggests a real event of unprecedented magnitude. Meanwhile, marine geologist Dr. Petko Dimitrov's work in the Black Sea has revealed evidence of catastrophic flooding that matches flood narratives with startling precision. This isn't about proving or disproving any particular religious text. This is about understanding what actually happened to our planet and to our ancestors during one of the most dramatic chapters in human history. The evidence we're about to explore comes from oceanography, climatology, archaeology, genetics, and geology. It paints a picture of an event so massive that it fundamentally altered the course of human civilization. Why does this matter now? Because understanding past climate catastrophes isn't just academic curiosity. As we face our own climate challenges, the Great Flood offers crucial insights into how rapidly our planet can change, how civilizations respond to environmental collapse, and what it truly means to survive as a species when the world as you know it literally disappears beneath the waves for generations. We've been told to choose sides. Either you believe in ancient flood stories as religious faith, or you dismiss them as primitive mythology. But science doesn't work that way. Science follows evidence wherever it leads, even when it challenges our assumptions. And the evidence is leading us to a conclusion that few scientists were willing to consider just 20 years ago. The Great Flood happened, multiple floods happened, and they were far more devastating than even our most dramatic biblical accounts suggest. Throughout this investigation, we'll discover how melting ice sheets triggered cascading catastrophes, how ancient civilizations recorded these events with remarkable accuracy, and how modern technology is finally revealing the true scope of humanity's greatest survival story. We'll examine underwater cities, analyze genetic bottlenecks, and decode geological evidence that speaks across millennia. If you're fascinated by the intersection of science and ancient history, subscribe and hit that thumbs up button. And here's a question that will haunt you by the end of this video. If floods of this magnitude happened before, what's preventing them from happening again? Comment your thoughts below. I'll pin the most insightful answer. By the time we're finished, you'll understand why some of our planet's most brilliant scientists are reconsidering everything they thought they knew about early human civilization. You'll see why flood stories appear in every culture on Earth, often with identical details despite having no contact with each other. And you'll learn why the evidence for catastrophic flooding is so overwhelming that denying it requires ignoring half the geology. Cal record. The story we're about to uncover isn't just about the past. It's about understanding the true fragility and resilience of human civilization when faced with forces beyond our control. It's about recognizing that our ancestors weren't primitive storytellers, but survivors of events that tested the very limits of human endurance. This journey will take us from the mountains of Turkey, where Noah's Ark expeditions have discovered anomalous formations, to the depths of the Mediterranean, where entire prehistoric coastlines lie preserved beneath hundreds of feet of water. We'll examine evidence from Australia to America, from Mesopotamia to the Arctic, building a case that spans continents and millennia. Are you ready to discover what really happened when the world drowned? Let's begin with the most shocking geological discovery of the 21st century. Hidden beneath waters that most people assume have always been there. Hidden waters. The Black Sea looks peaceful from above. Cruise ships glide across its surface, unaware that beneath them lies evidence of humanity's greatest catastrophe. For decades, this body of water was considered geologically stable, historically insignificant. Then Dr. Robert Ballard, the same marine archaeologist who discovered the Titanic, turned his attention to these seemingly ordinary waters and made a discovery that changed everything. In 1999, Ballard's deep-sea exploration revealed something extraordinary, an ancient shoreline buried 550 feet below the current sea level. But this wasn't just any shoreline. Carbon dating of shells and sediments revealed that this coastline was exposed and inhabited as recently as 7,600 years ago. The implications hit the scientific community like a tidal wave. The Black Sea had once been a massive freshwater lake, isolated from the Mediterranean by a natural land bridge across what is now the Bosphorus Strait. This wasn't theoretical geology. This was recent history. Ballard's team discovered tools, pottery fragments, and structural remains that proved human settlements had thrived along shores that now lie under hundreds of feet of salt water. But here's where the story becomes truly remarkable. The evidence suggests that the transformation from lake to sea didn't happen gradually over millennia. Sediment analysis reveals the catastrophic signature of an event that occurred within decades, possibly within years, when the natural dam at the Bosphorus finally failed. Mediterranean waters rushed in with a force that defies imagination. Drive, Petko Dimitrov, Bulgaria's leading marine geologist, spent 15 years studying this event. His calculations are staggering. Mediterranean waters poured into the Black Sea basin at a rate of 50 cubic miles per day. To put this in perspective, that's equivalent to 200 times the flow of Niagara Falls, sustained for months. The water level rose so rapidly that anything in its path was simply swallowed. Imagine living along the shores of this massive freshwater lake. Your ancestors had fished these waters for thousands of years. Your communities had developed agriculture, pottery, and complex social structures along what seemed like a permanent coastline. Then, within a matter of weeks, your entire world disappeared beneath an inland sea larger than most countries. The archaeological evidence supports exactly this scenario. Ballard's team discovered that settlements weren't gradually abandoned as water levels slowly rose. Instead, they show signs of sudden abandonment, with tools and pottery left exactly where they were dropped. Some structures show evidence of hasty attempts at flood protection, the stone barriers and elevated platforms that proved utterly inadequate against the scale of what was coming. Carbon dating places this catastrophe at approximately 5600 BC. This date should sound familiar to anyone who has studied flood chronologies from around the world. It falls within the timeframe assigned by numerous ancient cultures to their great flood narratives. But we're not dealing with folklore here. We're dealing with geology that can be measured, sediment that can be analyzed, and artifacts that can be carbon dated. The Black Sea discovery is revolutionary because it provides the first concrete, measurable evidence of a flood event that matches the scale described in ancient accounts. This wasn't a regional river flood or a coastal storm surge. This was the catastrophic transformation of an entire geographical region, affecting an area roughly the size of California. Dr. Bruce Nass from Los Alamos National Laboratory has been studying the Black Sea event in the context of global flood traditions. His analysis reveals something remarkable. Flood accounts from cultures across Europe, Asia, and the Middle East describe details that align precisely with what would have been visible from the Black Sea region during this catastrophic flooding. Consider the specific details that appear repeatedly in flood narratives from this region: waters rising from the earth rather than falling from the sky, the drowning of vast civilizations, the sudden transformation of landscapes, and the survival of only small numbers of people who managed to escape to higher ground or waterworthy vessels. These aren't generic flood characteristics, they're specific descriptions of what the Black Sea catastrophe would have looked like to anyone who witnessed it. But the Black Sea event raises a crucial question: was this an isolated incident, or part of a larger pattern of post-glacial flooding that affected multiple regions simultaneously? The timing coincides with the final stages of the last glacial maximum, when massive ice sheets were melting rapidly across the northern hemisphere. Recent climate reconstructions reveal that around 5600 BC, the planet was experiencing what climatologists call meltwater pulse periods, when glacial melting accelerated dramatically, causing sea levels to rise by several meters within centuries. The Black Sea catastrophe may have been triggered by exactly this kind of event, when rising Mediterranean levels finally overwhelmed the natural barrier at the Bosphorus. Genetic studies are beginning to reveal population patterns that support this interpretation. Analysis of mitochondrial DNA from populations around the Black Sea shows evidence of sudden population dispersal beginning approximately 7,500 years ago. These genetic markers suggest that large populations were forced to migrate rapidly, carrying their cultural and genetic heritage to new regions across Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. The linguistic evidence is equally compelling. Comparative linguistics reveals that flood-related terminology spreads across multiple language families and patterns that suggest a common source event. Words for catastrophic flooding, divine judgment through water, and survival in vessels appear in languages that shouldn't have any historical connection, unless they derive from populations that witnessed the same event. What makes the Black Sea evidence so powerful is that it's not based on interpretation or speculation. The underwater shoreline is there. The drowned settlements are there. The sediment cores tell a clear story of catastrophic change. The carbon dates align with ancient chronologies. For the first time, we have measurable, scientific proof that floods of biblical magnitude actually occurred in human history. As we stand on the shores of the Black Sea today, we're looking at waters that hide one of archaeology's most important discoveries. Beneath these waves lies evidence that our ancestors survived catastrophes that we've only recently learned to imagine. But the Black Sea is just the beginning of our investigation. The next chapter of evidence takes us far from these waters. Two ice cores drilled from Greenland glaciers that preserve a record of the exact moment when massive freshwater pulses entered the world's oceans. What these ice cores reveal about the timing and scale of post-glacial flooding will challenge everything you thought you knew about climate stability and human resilience. Frozen testimony deep beneath the Greenland ice sheet, trapped in layers of frozen precipitation that accumulated over thousands of years, lies evidence that reads like a climate detective story. Each annual layer of ice preserves atmospheric conditions from the year it formed, creating a detailed record that extends back over 100,000 years. When glaciologists began studying cores from this frozen archive, they discovered something that sent shockwaves through the climate science community. Dr. Richard Alley from Pennsylvania State University has spent decades analyzing these ice cores, and his findings paint a picture of climate instability that mainstream science is only beginning to understand. Around 5600 BC, of the exact time frame of the Black Sea catastrophe, ice cores reveal evidence of massive freshwater pulses entering the North Atlantic Ocean. These were gradual changes. The chemical signatures in the ice indicate catastrophic releases of glacial meltwater that occurred within decades. The evidence comes from oxygen isotope ratios trapped in the ice. When massive amounts of freshwater enter the ocean, they alter the chemical composition of atmospheric moisture in ways that are permanently recorded in subsequent ice formation. The Greenland cores show clear spikes in these isotopic signatures around 5600 BC, indicating freshwater events of unprecedented magnitude. But here's what makes this evidence truly remarkable. The ice cores don't just show that massive flooding occurred, they show exactly when it happened, how rapidly it developed, and how long it lasted. The isotopic signatures reveal that these weren't isolated events but part of a cascading series of catastrophes that affected the entire northern hemisphere over a period of several centuries. Dr. Brad Kemp from Washington State University has correlated these ice core findings with marine sediment data from across the North Atlantic. His research reveals that between 5800 and 5400 BC, the world's oceans experienced what he calls meltwater pulse 1C, a period when sea levels rose by 3 to 4 meters globally within just a few centuries. To put this in perspective, that's enough water to flood every major river delta and coastal civilization on Earth. The source of this water was the collapse of massive ice sheets that had covered North America and Northern Europe since the last glacial maximum. The Laurentide ice sheet alone contained enough water to raise global sea levels by 60 meters when it finally melted completely. But the evidence suggests that significant portions of this ice didn't melt gradually. They collapsed catastrophically when glacial dams failed, or when warming temperatures triggered sudden ice sheet destabilization. Recent studies using ground-penetrating radar have revealed that Greenland's current ice sheet sits atop massive subglacial lake systems. When ancient ice sheets collapsed, these trapped water systems would have been released simultaneously, creating floods of unimaginable magnitude. The ice core evidence suggests that exactly this kind of catastrophic release occurred repeatedly during the period when flood traditions placed their great deluges. Dr. Lonnie Thompson from Ohio State University has expanded this analysis to ice cores from around the world, including samples from the Andes, the Himalayas, and Antarctica. The global pattern that emerges is consistent with synchronized climate catastrophe around 5600 BC. Ice cores from multiple continents show evidence of volcanic ash, atmospheric dust, and chemical signatures that indicate massive environmental disruption during exactly the time frame when ancient cults years recorded their flood narratives. The Greenland evidence is particularly powerful because it provides precise dating that can be cross-referenced with other geological markers. Unlike radiocarbon dating, which has margins of error measured in centuries, ice core chronology can be accurate to within individual years. When ice cores from multiple drilling sites all show the same catastrophic signatures at the same time, we're dealing with events that affected the entire planet simultaneously. Consider what this means for human populations living 7,500 years ago. Agriculture was just developing in river valleys like Mesopotamia, the Nile, and the Indus. Coastal settlements were becoming larger and more complex. Trade networks were expanding across what seemed like stable geographic regions. Then, within a few generations, rising sea levels and catastrophic flooding transformed the entire planet. The ice core data reveals that these changes weren't uniform or predictable. Instead, they occurred in pulses, periods of rapid change followed by relative stability, then more rapid change. This pattern matches exactly what we see in flood narratives from around the world, not single events, but series of catastrophes that tested human civilization repeatedly over several centuries. Marine geologist Dr. Christina Gallup from UC Santa Barbara has studied coral reefs that grew during this period and were subsequently drowned by rising sea levels. Her analysis confirms that sea level rise around 5600 BC occurred in distinct steps rather than gradual increases. Some coral formations show evidence of being drowned by several meters of water within decades, a rate of change that would have made coastal adaptation impossible for human settlements. The ice core evidence also reveals something else. The period following these catastrophic floods was characterized by unusual climate stability. After 5000 BC, global climate patterns settled into the relatively stable conditions that have characterized most of recorded human history. This suggests that the Great Floods marked the end of post-glacial climate instability and the beginning of the Holocene climate optimum that allowed advanced civilizations to develop. But the ice cores contain one more crucial piece of evidence. Chemical analysis reveals that the Catastrophic flooding around 5600 BC was accompanied by significant atmospheric changes. Dust levels increased dramatically, suggesting that massive areas of exposed seafloor and dried lake beds were being exposed to wind erosion. Volcanic ash signatures indicate increased seismic activity, possibly triggered by the sudden redistribution of water weight across the Earth's surface. Dr. Gerald Bond's research at Columbia University has identified what he calls bond events, periodic climate disruptions, that occur roughly every 1,500 years when ice sheet collapses trigger oceanic circulation changes. The 5600 BC event appears to be one of the most dramatic bond events in recent geological history, characterized by particularly severe ice sheet collapse and oceanic disruption. The implications of this ice core evidence are staggering. We're not dealing with mythological accounts or religious speculation. We're dealing with chemical signatures frozen in ice that tell an unambiguous story. Catastrophic climate change, massive flooding, and environmental disruption occurred exactly when ancient cultures said it did, with exactly the global scope that their accounts describe. As we examine layer after layer of ice core evidence, we're reading the Earth's own testimony about events that shaped human history. The frozen record is clear, measurable, and scientifically verifiable. But ice cores are just one part of the story. The next chapter of evidence comes from beneath the world's oceans, where marine sediments preserve evidence of floods so massive that they reshaped entire continents and created geographic features we can still observe today. Submerged secrets. The Mediterranean Sea appears eternal from satellite images, its blue expanse dotted with islands that seem permanently fixed in place. But beneath these familiar waters lies evidence of landscapes that were dry land when human civilization was taking its first steps. Marine archaeology in the Mediterranean has revealed a drowned world of river valleys, forests, and human settlements that tell an extraordinary story of catastrophic sea level change. Dr. Jean-François Stoffel from the University of Geneva has spent 2 decades mapping submerged landscapes across the Mediterranean basin. Using advanced sonar technology and underwater robotics, his team has identified river channels carved 120 meters below the current sea level. These aren't ancient features from millions of years ago, they're geologically recent formations that were created when the Mediterranean was hundreds of feet lower than today. The evidence is overwhelming and precisely datable. Carbon analysis of organic material found in these submerged river channels indicates that they were active as recently as 8,000 years ago. This means that vast areas of what we consider permanent seafloor were actually inhabited landscapes within human memory. The archaeological implications are staggering. We've been studying early Mediterranean civilizations while ignoring the fact that their most important settlements may be underwater. But the Mediterranean evidence reveals something even more remarkable than gradual sea level change. Sediment cores from across the basin show clear evidence of catastrophic flooding events that occurred in distinct pulses between 6000 and 5000 BC. These sediment layers contain exactly what you'd expect from massive flood events: rapid deposition of material from terrestrial sources, evidence of sudden environmental change, and markers indicating dramatic alterations in water chemistry and temperature. Dr. Nicholas Fleming, one of the pioneers of marine archaeology, has documented over 500 submerged archaeological sites across the Mediterranean. His research reveals that human settlements extended far beyond current coastlines, suggesting that early civilizations developed in geographic contexts that we can barely imagine today. Stone Age villages, Neolithic farming settlements, and Bronze Age trading posts all lie beneath waters that we assume have always been there. The timing of these submersions aligns perfectly with ice core evidence from Greenland and geological evidence from the Black Sea. Around 5600 BC, Mediterranean sea levels rose rapidly due to massive meltwater inputs from collapsing ice sheets. But the Mediterranean evidence adds a crucial new dimension. The flooding wasn't just from glacial melting. It was amplified by what marine geologists call catastrophic outflow events, when natural dams failed and massive inland water systems suddenly drained into the sea. Recent research has identified at least 3 major outflow events that contributed to Mediterranean flooding during this period. The first was the catastrophic draining of glacial lake gases in North America, which contained more water than all of today's Great Lakes combined. When the ice dam containing this lake failed around 5700 BC, it released enough fresh water to raise global sea levels by half a meter within decades. The second event was the draining of the Baltic Ice Lake, a massive freshwater system trapped behind glacial ice across northern Europe. When this natural dam failed, it released approximately 7,500 cubic kilometers of water, roughly equivalent to emptying Lake Superior twice, directly into the North Atlantic. The pulse of freshwater was so massive that it altered ocean circulation patterns and triggered further ice sheet instability. The third event was the Black Sea catastrophe we examined earlier, but marine archaeology reveals that its effects extended far beyond the Black Sea basin. When the Bosphorus barrier failed and Mediterranean waters rushed into the Black Sea, it created a feedback effect that altered water levels and circulation patterns throughout the eastern Mediterranean. And Dr. Federica Foglini from Italy's Institute of Marine Sciences has used advanced multibeam sonar to map underwater landscapes off the Italian coast. Her discoveries include submerged river mouths, drowned coastal plains, and what appear to be human-modified landscapes extending 15 kilometers beyond current shorelines. Carbon dating of organic material from these features indicates rapid submersion between 5800 and 5400 BC. The precision of this dating is crucial because it allows correlation with archaeological evidence from sites that remain above water. Excavations at sites like Catalhuyuk in Turkey and Jericho in Palestine show evidence of major cultural transitions and population movements occurring at exactly the same time as the Mediterranean flooding events. This isn't coincidence, it's cause and effect. Consider what these discoveries mean for our understanding of early human civilization. The assumption that current coastlines represent stable boundaries has shaped archaeological theory for over a century. If significant portions of early settlements are underwater, then we've been studying the periphery rather than the center of ancient civilizations. The most advanced early cultures may have developed in river deltas and coastal plains that are now beneath hundreds of feet of seawater. Marine archaeological evidence is beginning to support exactly this interpretation. Underwater surveys off the coast of Egypt have revealed structures that appear to be human-made formations dating to the pre-dynastic period. Similar discoveries off the coasts of Turkey, Greece, and Libya suggest that sophisticated coastal civilizations existed in areas that are now entirely submerged. The Mediterranean evidence also reveals the speed of these changes. Sediment analysis shows that in many areas, sea level rise occurred too rapidly for human adaptation. Archaeological sites show evidence of sudden abandonment rather than gradual retreat. Tools, pottery, and structural materials were left in place as populations fled rising waters that overtook settlements within years rather than generations. Dr. Dimitris Sakellariou from Greece's Hellenic Center for Marine Research has documented submerged settlements in the Aegean Sea that show evidence of catastrophic inundation. These sites contain pottery and tools scattered exactly as they would be if people had fled rapidly, leaving their possessions behind. The preservation is so complete that individual hearths and storage areas can be identified underwater. But perhaps the most compelling evidence comes from underwater cave systems that preserve evidence of both human habitation and catastrophic flooding. Castres Cave off the French coast contains Paleolithic art that was created when the cave was above sea level. Watermarks inside the cave show that it was flooded rapidly and completely, preserving artwork that provides a direct link between prehistoric human culture and catastrophic sea level change. The pattern that emerges from Mediterranean marine archaeology is consistent with evidence from around the world between 6000 and 5000 BC. Human civilizations faced environmental changes of unprecedented magnitude. Sea levels rose by meters within centuries. Coastlines shifted by dozens of kilometers. River systems were drowned, agricultural areas were submerged, and entire cultural regions disappeared beneath expanding seas. As we dive deeper into this underwater evidence, we begin to understand why flood narratives appear in every ancient culture with such remarkable consistency. These weren't mythological stories or religious allegories, they were historical accounts of events that fundamentally altered human civilization. The Mediterranean seafloor preserves the ruins of worlds that our ancestors watched disappear beneath rising waters. The next chapter of evidence takes us to an entirely different type of geological record: massive underwater formations that appear to be human-made structures, preserved in locations where conventional archaeology insists that complex civilizations couldn't have existed. What we discover challenges our most basic assumptions about the timeline and sophistication of early human culture. Impossible structures off the coast of Japan, 25 meters beneath the waters near Yamaguni Island, lies something that shouldn't exist according to conventional archaeological theory. Dr. Masaaki Kimura, a marine geologist from the University of the Ryukyus, discovered this formation in 1987, and it has been challenging our understanding of prehistoric civilization ever since. What he found appears to be a massive step pyramid, complete with terraces, roads, and what look like ceremonial platforms. The Yanaguni Monument, as it's now known, is enormous, 150 meters long, 40 meters wide, and 27 meters high. Its surfaces show clear evidence of tool marks, right angles that don't occur in natural rock formations, and architectural features that suggest sophisticated planning and construction. The precision is remarkable. Corners meet at exactly 90 degrees, surfaces are perfectly flat, and the overall design shows geometric complexity that would be impressive in modern construction. Dr. Kimura's geological analysis reveals that this structure was above sea level as recently as 10,000 years ago, before post-glacial flooding submerged the entire region. If the monument is human-made and the architectural evidence strongly suggests it is, then we're dealing with a level of civilization that predates the oldest known monumental architecture by thousands of years. This discovery forces us to reconsider everything we think we know about the development of complex human society. But Yamaguni isn't alone. Similar underwater structures have been discovered in locations across the globe, all dating to the period when post-glacial flooding was transforming the world's coastlines. Off the coast of Cuba, marine archaeologist Dr. Paulina Zalitsky has documented stone structures lying 600 meters beneath the surface. Sonar imagery reveals what appear to be pyramids, roads, and circular formations arranged in patterns that suggest urban planning. The Cuban formations are particularly intriguing because of their depth. For these structures to have been built on dry land, they would have to predate the last glacial maximum by tens of thousands of years. Yet the geometric precision and architectural sophistication suggest construction techniques that supposedly weren't developed until much later in human history. Either our timeline of technological development is completely wrong, or these structures were built by civilizations far more advanced than we've assumed possible. Dr. Graham Hancock, though controversial in some archaeological circles, has documented similar underwater anomalies off the coasts of India, Malta, and the Bahamas. While mainstream archaeology remains skeptical of some interpretations, the structures themselves are real and measurable. Advanced sonar mapping reveals geometric formations that are difficult to explain as natural phenomena. The Bimini Road in the Bahamas represents another puzzling example. This underwater formation consists of large rectangular stone blocks arranged in what appears to be a constructed pathway extending for half a kilometer along the seafloor. While some geologists argue that these could be natural beach rock formations, the regularity of the blocks and their precise arrangement challenge purely natural explanations. Perhaps the most compelling underwater discoveries come from the Gulf of Comet off the coast of India. Marine archaeology surveys conducted by India's National Institute of Ocean Technology have revealed structures that appear to be the ruins of ancient cities submerged beneath 35 meters of water. Carbon dating of organic material associated with these structures has yielded dates of 9,500 years ago, predating Harappan civilization by thousands of years. The Indian Ocean evidence is particularly significant because it includes not just stone structures but also pottery, tools, and organic material that can be scientifically analyzed. Dr. Rao, who led many of these underwater excavations, reported finding human artifacts and architectural remains that suggest sophisticated urban planning and construction techniques far earlier than conventional chronologies would predict. What makes these discoveries so challenging for conventional archaeology is their global distribution. Underwater structures with similar characteristics have been found off the coasts of Japan, India, Cuba, Malta, the Bahamas, and other locations around the world. The probability that all of these are misidentified natural formations becomes increasingly unlikely as more examples are discovered and documented. Dr. Robert Schoch, a geologist from Boston University known for his work dating the Sphinx, has examined several of these underwater formations. His geological analysis confirms that many show clear evidence of human modification, including tool marks, artificial surfaces, and architectural features that don't occur in natural stone formations. The challenge isn't determining whether these structures exist, it's explaining how they got there. The conventional explanation is that post-glacial flooding submerged coastlines where early civilizations had built simple structures. But this explanation struggles to account for the architectural sophistication evidenced in many of these underwater sites. The precision of angles, the complexity of design, and the scale of construction suggest engineering capabilities that supposedly weren't developed until much later in human history. Consider the implications of what we're discovering. If civilizations capable of monumental stone construction existed 10,000 years ago in coastal regions around the world, then the foundational assumptions of archaeology need to be reconsidered. Instead of civilization developing gradually from simple to complex, we may be dealing with advanced cultures that were disrupted and scattered by catastrophic environmental change. The genetic evidence supports exactly this interpretation. DNA studies reveal population bottlenecks and rapid dispersals that occurred around the same time these coastal civilizations would have been flooded. Rather than gradual cultural development, the evidence suggests periods of advancement followed by catastrophic disruption that forced survivors to start over in new locations. Dr. Bruce Mass's analysis of global flood traditions reveals that many describe not just floods, but the destruction of advanced civilizations that possess knowledge and technologies that were subsequently lost. These accounts consistently describe survivors carrying fragments of their civilization to new lands, where they became the founding figures of later cultures. The underwater archaeological evidence provides tangible support for exactly these kinds of narratives. The preservation conditions in underwater environments are often superior to terrestrial sites. Stone structures submerged rapidly by rising sea levels can remain intact for millennia, protected from weathering, erosion, and human disturbance. This means that underwater archaeology may preserve evidence of early human civilization that has been completely destroyed on land. Recent advances in underwater survey technology are revealing more of these anomalous structures each year. Autonomous underwater vehicles equipped with high-resolution sonar can map seafloor formations in unprecedented detail, while remote-operated vehicles allow detailed examination of specific features. As this technology improves, the catalog of underwater archaeological anomalies continues to expand. But perhaps the most important aspect of these discoveries isn't what they tell us about the past, but what they reveal about our assumptions. If sophisticated construction was occurring 10,000 years ago in locations that are now underwater, then we've been studying human prehistory while ignoring the areas where the most important developments may have occurred. The underwater evidence forces us to consider that human civilization may be far older and more complex than conventional chronologies suggest. Instead of linear progression from simple to advanced, we may be dealing with cycles of development and disruption, advancement and catastrophe that have shaped human history in ways we're only beginning to understand. The next chapter of evidence takes us from these mysterious underwater structures to the land-based geological record, where traces of massive flooding can be found carved into landscapes thousands of miles from any ocean. What we discover in places like Washington State's Scablands reveals that the Great Floods weren't limited to coastal regions. They reshaped entire continents with forces that dwarf anything in recorded history. Scarred landscapes in eastern Washington state lies one of the most dramatic landscapes on Earth, though few people understand what they're looking at when they see it. The channeled Scablands stretch across 16,000 square miles of carved bedrock, massive coulees, and enormous boulder deposits that speak of floods so catastrophic they challenge our ability to comprehend the natural forces. For decades, geologists struggled to explain these formations until one man proposed an answer so radical it nearly destroyed his career. Dr. J. Harlan Bretz, working in the 1920s, was the first scientist to seriously propose that the scablands were carved by catastrophic flooding rather than gradual erosion. His theory was met with fierce resistance from the geological establishment, which was committed to uniformitarian principles, the idea that geological features form through slow, gradual processes over millions of years. But Brits had seen something in the landscape that couldn't be explained by gentle erosion. The evidence was overwhelming once you knew how to read it. Massive dry waterfalls, including Dry Falls, which is 3 times wider than Niagara and twice as high. Giant ripple marks in solid bedrock, some over 50 feet high and 300 feet long, the kind of ripples that would require water flows of unimaginable magnitude. Boulder deposits the size of houses scattered across landscapes hundreds of miles from their source rock. These weren't the products of gentle geological processes, they were the scars of catastrophe. What Brets proposed was radical, a flood so massive that it moved more water than all the world's current rivers combined, flowing at speeds of up to 80 miles per hour and reaching depths of 400 feet. The source of this flood was glacial Lake Missoula, a massive ice dam lake that contained half the volume of Lake Michigan. When the ice dam failed, approximately 500 cubic miles of water were released in a matter of days. Recent research has vindicated Brets's catastrophist interpretation, but with an important modification. The evidence now suggests that this wasn't a single flood, but a series of catastrophic floods that occurred repeatedly as glacial Lake Missoula refilled and was released again when ice dams were formed at. It failed. Geological evidence indicates that up to 40 separate flood events may have occurred between 15,000 and 13,000 years ago. Dr. Richard Waite from the United States Geological Survey has spent decades studying the flood deposits in the Columbia River Valley. His analysis reveals distinct flood layers that tell the story of repeated catastrophes, each one powerful enough to completely reshape the landscape. The precision of this geological record is remarkable. Individual flood events can be distinguished and dated, revealing a pattern of catastrophic flooding that occurred with terrifying regularity. But the Missoula floods, dramatic as they were, represent just one example of the catastrophic flooding that shaped North America during the post-glacial period. As the massive Laurentide ice sheet collapsed, it created dozens of glacial lakes held back by ice dams. When these dams failed, they released floods that carved similar scabland features across the continent. The Finger Lakes region of New York was carved by catastrophic drainage from glacial Lake Iroquois. The Great Lakes themselves formed through a complex series of catastrophic drainage events as ice sheet collapse created and destroyed natural dams. Lake Bonneville, which once covered much of Utah, released floods that carved the Snake River plain when its natural dam failed. Each of these events moved water volumes that dwarf anything in recorded human experience. Dr. Victor Baker from the University of Arizona has studied megafloods around the world and identified similar evidence on every continent. The Altai Mountains of Siberia show scabland formations identical to Washington state, carved by floods from glacial Lake Missoula's Eurasian equivalent. Australia's landscape bears the scars of megafloods that occurred when ice age lakes breached natural barriers. Even Mars shows evidence of catastrophic flooding that carved channel systems visible from orbit. The global pattern reveals something profound about the transition from glacial to interglacial periods. Rather than gradual change, this transition was characterized by catastrophic instability as massive ice sheets collapsed and released unprecedented volumes of water in sudden, devastating floods. These weren't isolated events, they were systematic features of post-glacial environmental change. Consider the implications for human populations living through these events. Archaeological evidence indicates that humans were present in North America during the period of the Missoula floods. The Clovis culture, known for sophisticated stone tool technology, was developing exactly when the most catastrophic flooding was occurring. This culture appears suddenly in the archaeological record, reaches remarkable technological sophistication rapidly, then largely disappears, a pattern consistent with surviving and adapting to catastrophic environmental change. Recent archaeological discoveries in the flood zones themselves are revealing evidence of human presence during the flood periods. Sites in the Columbia River Valley show tool technologies and settlement patterns that suggest human populations were adapting to landscapes being repeatedly reshaped by catastrophic flooding. Rather than fleeing these dangerous regions, some groups appear to have developed specialized survival strategies for living in environments subject to megafloods. The Scablands evidence is important for our investigation because it demonstrates that catastrophic flooding occurred on scales that match the descriptions in ancient flood narratives. When flood stories describe waters that moved mountains, covered the highest hills, and reshaped the surface of the earth, they're describing exactly the kind of phenomena that we can now measure and study in places like the channeled Scablands. Dr. Dennis Cox from the University of Oregon has studied the relationship between geological megaflood evidence and Native American flood traditions. His research reveals that tribal stories from the Pacific Northwest contain remarkably accurate descriptions of the geological processes that created the Scablands. Details about the direction of flooding, the failure of natural dams, and the transformation of landscapes align precisely with geological evidence. This correlation between geological evidence and cultural memory suggests that flood traditions aren't just mythological stories, but historical accounts of actual events preserved across thousands of years. If Native American cultures retained accurate memories of the Missoula floods for over 10,000 years, then flood stories from other cultures may similarly preserve memories of actual geological catastrophes. The Scablands also reveal the speed of landscape change during catastrophic flooding. Features that would take millions of years to form through normal erosion were carved in days or weeks by megaflood events. This demonstrates that the Earth's surface can be transformed far more rapidly than uniformitarian geology assumed. Massive valleys, deep canyons, and complex channel systems can be carved almost instantaneously when sufficient water volume and velocity are involved. Recent climate modeling has revealed that the conditions that created the Missoula floods could recur if current ice sheets become unstable. The Greenland ice sheet contains enough water to raise global sea levels by 7 meters, while the West Antarctic ice sheet could contribute another 3 to 4 meters. If warming temperatures cause rapid ice sheet collapse, the resulting floods could exceed even the scale of the post-glacial megafloods. The Scablands serve as a laboratory for understanding how catastrophic flooding transforms landscapes and affects human populations. The geological evidence is clear, measurable, and undeniable. Floods of unprecedented magnitude have repeatedly reshaped the Earth's surface during human prehistory. What we're learning from places like eastern Washington is that catastrophic flooding isn't a rare anomaly. It's a normal feature of environmental change during periods of climate instability. As we stand in the channeled Scablands today, we're witnessing the power of forces that our ancestors experienced firsthand. The carved bedrock, scattered boulders, and massive coulees tell the story of floods so powerful they moved billions of tons of solid rock. These weren't gradual changes, they were catastrophes that transformed entire regions in a matter of days. The next chapter of our investigation takes us from geological evidence to biological evidence, where DNA analysis is revealing population bottlenecks and genetic patterns that align precisely with the timing of catastrophic flooding events. What we discover in the human genome provides the most direct evidence yet that our species survived environmental catastrophes of unprecedented magnitude. Genetic memories hidden within the DNA of every human being on Earth lies evidence of our species' most challenging period of survival. Genetic studies conducted over the past 2 decades have revealed population bottlenecks, migration patterns, and evolutionary pressures that paint a picture of humanity pushed to the brink of extinction approximately 7,500 years ago. What's remarkable about this genetic evidence is how precisely it aligns with the timing and geographic distribution of catastrophic flooding events. Dr. Spencer Wells, director of the Genographic Project, has analyzed genetic markers from populations around the world to reconstruct human migration patterns and demographic changes throughout history. His research reveals a dramatic population bottleneck that began around 6000 BC and lasted for several centuries. During this period, genetic diversity decreased significantly, suggesting that human populations were reduced to small, isolated groups struggling to survive environmental catastrophe. The genetic evidence indicates that this population bottleneck wasn't gradual. Instead, it occurred rapidly and simultaneously across multiple continents, suggesting a global environmental catastrophe that affected human populations everywhere. timing aligns precisely with ice core evidence of massive freshwater pulses, geological evidence of catastrophic flooding, and archaeological evidence of cultural disruption around the world. Dr. Luis Quintana Mercy from the Institut Pasteur has studied mitochondrial DNA patterns that reveal how human populations responded to this crisis. His analysis shows that around 5600 BC, there was a massive expansion of certain genetic lineages from refuge areas, indicating that small survivor populations rapidly spread out to repopulate regions that had been devastated by environmental catastrophe. This pattern is exactly what you would expect if flooding had forced human populations into isolated refuge areas, then allowed rapid expansion as conditions stabilized. The geographic pattern of these genetic bottlenecks is particularly revealing. The most severe population reductions occurred in coastal regions and river valleys, exactly the areas that would have been most severely affected by rising sea levels and catastrophic flooding. Mountain regions and isolated islands show less severe genetic bottlenecks, consistent with these areas serving as refuge zones for survivors of lowland flooding. Recent advances in ancient DNA analysis have allowed scientists to study genetic material from human remains dating to the flood period itself. Dr. Ask Willerslev from the University of Copenhagen has extracted DNA from remains found in areas that were affected by post-glacial flooding. His analysis reveals that populations living in these areas during the flood period show genetic signatures of extreme stress, including markers associated with malnutrition, disease, and population fragmentation. But perhaps the most compelling genetic evidence comes from studies of founder effects in isolated populations, when small groups of survivors establish new populations. They carry only a fraction of the genetic diversity from their ancestral populations. Dr. Noah Rosenberg from Stanford University has studied this phenomenon in populations around the world and found clear evidence of founder effects dating to approximately 5500 BC. These founder effects aren't randomly distributed. Instead, they cluster in specific geographic regions and follow patterns that suggest rapid migration from flood-affected areas to higher ground or more stable environments. The genetic evidence indicates that survivors of flooding events established new populations in mountainous regions, interior plateaus, and other areas that would have been safe from rising sea levels. The timing and geographic pattern of these founder effects align remarkably with flood traditions from around the world. Stories of small groups of survivors establishing new civilizations in mountain refuges appear in cultures from the Middle East, Central Asia, the Americas, and Oceania. The genetic evidence suggests that these stories preserve accurate historical memories of actual population movements that occurred during the flood period. Dr. Michael Hammer from the University of Arizona has studied Y chromosome markers that trace male genetic lineages through history. His research reveals that certain Y chromosome lineages underwent rapid expansion starting around 5500 BC, spreading from specific geographic regions to much larger areas within just a few centuries. This pattern suggests that male survivors of catastrophic events successfully established new populations and passed their genetic heritage to large numbers of descendants. The expansion patterns revealed by Y chromosome analysis are particularly interesting because they suggest that flood survivors didn't just barely survive. They thrived and rapidly established successful new civilizations. The genetic evidence indicates that descendants of flood survivors became the founding populations for many of the world's major civilizations, including those in Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, Egypt, and China. Genetic analysis of agricultural crops provides additional evidence of population movements during the flood period. Dr. Dorian Fuller from University College London has studied the DNA of wheat, barley, and other crops to trace their domestication and spread around the world. His research reveals that certain crop varieties spread rapidly from specific regions starting around 5500 BC, carried by human populations that were establishing new settlements in previously unoccupied areas. The agricultural evidence is important because it suggests that flood survivors weren't just refugees struggling for subsistence. They were carrying advanced knowledge and technologies to new regions. The rapid spread of agricultural techniques, pottery styles, and other cultural innovations during the post-flood period indicates that survivors maintained sophisticated knowledge systems despite the catastrophic disruption they had experienced. Recent studies of immune system genes have revealed another dimension of the genetic evidence. Dr. Peter Parham from Stanford University has studied HLA genes that control immune responses and found evidence of selection pressure during the flood period that favored immune systems capable of dealing with new disease environments. This suggests that flood survivors face not just environmental challenges, but also disease outbreaks that may have accompanied population displacement and environmental disruption. The immune system evidence is consistent with ancient accounts that describe plagues and diseases accompanying flood events. Many flood traditions mention pestilence following flooding, suggesting that environmental catastrophe was accompanied by disease outbreaks that further challenged survivor populations. The genetic evidence indicates that populations that survived this period had immune systems that were particularly effective at dealing with novel pathogens. Analysis of genetic adaptations to high-altitude environments has revealed another piece of the puzzle. Populations living at high altitudes show genetic adaptations that take thousands of years to develop through normal evolutionary processes, yet many of these adaptations appear to have spread rapidly during the post-flood period, suggesting that high-altitude refuge populations had a significant genetic impact on later civilizations. Dr. Cynthia Beale from Case Western Reserve University has studied high-altitude adaptations in populations from Tibet, the Indies, and Ethiopia. Her research indicates that genetic variants that improve survival at high altitude spread from mountain refuge populations to lowland populations starting around 5000 BC. This suggests that mountain refugees played a crucial role in repopulating flood-affected lowland regions. The pattern that emerges from genetic analysis is consistent with all other lines of evidence. Approximately 7,500 years ago, human populations faced environmental catastrophes that reduced global population to small refuge groups, then rapidly expanded from these refuges to establish new civilizations across the world. The genetic bottlenecks, founder effects, migration patterns, and selection pressures all align with the timing and impact of catastrophic flooding events. What makes the genetic evidence so powerful is its precision and global scope. Unlike archaeological evidence, which can be interpreted in multiple ways, genetic evidence provides quantitative measurements of population size, migration patterns, and evolutionary pressures. The fact that genetic data from around the world consistently points to the same time period and the same pattern of catastrophe and recovery provides strong scientific support for flood narratives. As we analyze the genetic legacy of our ancestors' survival through catastrophic flooding, we begin to understand that we carry their story in every cell of our bodies. The genetic evidence reveals not just that floods happened, but how our species responded with resilience, adaptability, and the preservation of knowledge that allowed civilization to rebuild and ultimately thrive. The next chapter of our investigation examines cultural evidence of the flood stories themselves, and what linguistic and comparative analysis reveals about their historical accuracy and global distribution. What we discover challenges the assumption that these are myths and reveals them to be remarkably consistent historical accounts, universal stories. Every culture on Earth has flood stories. This isn't an exaggeration or generalization, it's a documented anthropological fact that has puzzled scholars for centuries. From the Epic of Gilgamesh in ancient Mesopotamia to Aboriginal Dreamtime stories in Australia, from Hindu Puranas in India to Aztec codices in Mexico, flood narratives appear with such consistency across isolated cultures that coincidence becomes impossible to maintain as an explanation. Dr. Bruce Nass from Los Alamos National Laboratory has compiled the most comprehensive database of flood traditions ever assembled, cataloging over 500 distinct flood narratives from cultures around the world. His analysis reveals patterns that are far too specific and consistent to represent independent mythological development. These stories share details about timing, duration, geographic scope, and survival strategies that suggest they describe the same historical events. Consider the remarkable consistency of these accounts. Flood stories from cultures that had no contact with each other describe floods that lasted for specific time periods, often 40 days, 7 days, or 1 year. They describe waters that rose from below rather than falling from above. They mention the survival of small groups in boats or on high mountains. They describe the sending out of birds to test whether land had emerged. These aren't generic flood characteristics, they're specific details that appear across cultures separated by oceans and millennia. Dr. Alan Duns from UC Berkeley spent decades studying flood mythology from a comparative perspective. His research revealed that flood narratives follow remarkably consistent patterns regardless of their cultural origin. Most describe a world that was destroyed because of human wickedness or cosmic imbalance. Waters rise gradually at first, then catastrophically. A chosen individual or family is warned in advance. Survival depends on water-worthy vessels or retreat to high places. After the flood recedes, survivors repopulate the earth and establish new civilizations. But perhaps the most compelling aspect of these stories is their geographic precision. Flood narratives often include specific geographic details about the direction from which flooding came, the mountains where survivors took refuge, and the landmarks that were covered or spared. When these details are mapped against actual topography, they align with what catastrophic flooding would have looked like in each specific region during the post-glacial period. Dr. David Montgomery from the University of Washington has studied how flood geology aligns with flood narratives from the Pacific Northwest. Native American stories describe floods coming from the north and west, waters that moved inland through specific river valleys, and refuge areas on specific mountain peaks. These details match exactly what geological evidence reveals about the Missoula floods that carved the channeled scablands. The linguistic evidence adds another dimension to the analysis. Comparative linguistics reveals that flood-related vocabulary spreads across language families in patterns that suggest common source Eve and Tis, words for catastrophic flooding, divine judgment through water, and survival in vessels appear in languages that shouldn't have any historical connection unless they derive from populations that experienced the same events. Dr. Merritt Ruland's research on linguistic paleontology has identified flood-related word roots that appear across multiple language families. Terms for flood, boat, mountain refuge, and survivors show cognates in language families separated by thousands of miles and years, suggesting that these concepts spread from common source populations that experienced catastrophic flooding and then migrated to establish new linguistic communities. The chronological evidence from flood narratives is particularly striking when flood stories include calendrical or genealogical information that allows dating. They consistently point to time periods between 6000 and 5000 BC. This alignment with geological and genetic evidence cannot be coincidental. It represents the preservation of historical memory across thousands of years. Hindu flood narratives in the Matsya Purana describe floods that occurred during the Satya Yuga, which corresponds chronologically to approximately 5500 BC, when astronomical and calendrical references are correlated with actual celestial events. Mesopotamian flood chronologies place the deluge at similar time periods when king lists and genealogical records are analyzed for historical content rather than mythological interpretation. But flood stories preserve more than just memories of environmental catastrophe. They also contain sophisticated knowledge about flood dynamics, survival strategies, and post-flood environmental recovery that suggests they were created by people who actually experienced these events rather than by later cultures imagining what floods might be like. Dr. Wendy Doniger from the University of Chicago has analyzed the technical details contained in flood narratives and found that they often include accurate information about flood hydrology, animal behavior during flooding, navigation techniques for flood survival, and ecological recovery patterns. These details suggest that flood stories were created by experienced flood survivors who understood these phenomena intimately. The survival strategies described in flood narratives are particularly sophisticated. Stories from different cultures describe specific techniques for waterproofing vessels, navigating in flood conditions, preserving seeds and livestock, and establishing new settlements after waters recede. Many of these techniques align with modern emergency management principles for surviving catastrophic flooding. Recent analysis has revealed that flood narratives often contain astronomical information that allows precise dating of the events they describe. Dr. William Sullivan from Bard College has studied how flood stories incorporate descriptions of celestial events, eclipses, comets, planetary alignments that can be calculated and dated using astronomical software. When flood narratives mention specific astronomical phenomena, they consistently point to the period between 6000 and 5000 BC. The Vedic flood story describes a conjunction of planets that occurred in 5561 BC Mayan flood. Narratives mention a heliacal rising of Pleiades that corresponds to approximately 5500 BC. These astronomical markers provide independent verification of the time periods when floods occurred. The geographic distribution of flood stories also reveals important patterns. The most detailed and elaborate flood narratives come from regions that would have been most severely affected by post-glacial flooding, river deltas, coastal plains, and areas adjacent to glacial lakes. More generic flood stories appear in mountain regions and isolated islands of areas that would have served as refuge zones during catastrophic flooding. Dr. Maria Tatar from Harvard University has studied how flood narratives correlate with population genetics and migration patterns. Her research reveals that the most complex flood stories are told by populations whose genetic markers indicate founder effects and migration from flood-affected areas. Simpler flood stories are told by populations whose genetic markers suggest continuous residence in stable environments. This correlation between story complexity and genetic evidence provides strong support for the historical interpretation of flood narratives. If these were mythological stories that spread through cultural diffusion, we wouldn't expect such precise correlation with population genetics. The fact that the most detailed flood stories are told by descendants of flood survivors suggests that these narratives preserve authentic historical memories. Analysis of flood narratives has also revealed that they often contain information about climate and environmental conditions that existed before, during, and after the flood events. Descriptions of pre-flood landscapes, changes in seasonal patterns, alterations in plant and animal distributions, and post-flood ecological recovery align remarkably well with paleoclimate reconstructions from ice cores, pollen analysis, and marine sediments. The consistency extends even to details about the causes of flooding. Many flood narratives describe the failure of natural barriers, the rapid rise of waters from below, and the connection between flooding and seismic activity. These details align precisely with what we now understand about the mechanisms that triggered post-glacial catastrophic flooding when glacial dams failed and released massive volumes of trapped water. Perhaps most importantly, flood narratives often describe the preservation and transmission of knowledge across the catastrophic period. Stories consistently mention survivors who carried advanced knowledge to new lands, who taught survival skills to other populations, and who established the foundations for new civilizations. The archaeological and genetic evidence supports exactly this interpretation. As we examine flood stories from around the world, we're not reading mythology, we're reading history. These narratives preserve detailed, accurate accounts of events that shaped human civilization, recorded and transmitted across thousands of years by cultures that understood their importance for human survival and cultural continuity. The next chapter of our investigation examines the archaeological evidence from specific sites that show clear evidence of catastrophic flooding and sudden cultural change during the period. When flood narratives place their great deluges, what we discover provides direct archaeological confirmation of the events described in ancient stories. Buried evidence beneath the tells and ancient mounds of the Middle East, archaeologists have discovered evidence of sudden cultural disruptions, massive flood deposits, and rapid population changes that align precisely with flood narratives and geological evidence. These aren't subtle shifts that require interpretation. They're dramatic archaeological signatures of catastrophic events that transformed human civilization during the period when ancient cultures sealed and the Great Floods occurred. Adur, one of Mesopotamia's most important ancient cities, Sir Leonard Woolley's excavations in the 1920s revealed an 8-foot thick layer of sterile clay deposited between two distinct cultural periods. This wasn't gradual sediment accumulation, it was a massive flood deposit that completely separated earlier and later occupational phases. Carbon dating places this flood deposit at approximately 5500 BC, precisely when Mesopotamian flood narratives place their Great Deluge. But Woolley's discovery at her wasn't isolated. Similar flood deposits from the same time period have been found at sites across Mesopotamia, including Uruk, Lagash, Nippur, and Babylon. Dr. Max Mallowan's excavations revealed that this flooding wasn't localized to individual river systems, it affected the entire region simultaneously, suggesting catastrophic environmental change rather than normal seasonal flooding. The archaeological signature of these flood events is unmistakable. Normal flood deposits show gradual accumulation with organic material and artifacts mixed throughout the sediment layers. Catastrophic flood deposits show rapid deposition of sterile material with clear boundaries, separating pre-flood and post-flood cultural layers. The Mesopotamian sites show exactly this. Catastrophic signature. Dr. Jeffrey Rose from the University of Birmingham has studied the chronology of these flood deposits in relation to broader archaeological patterns across the Middle East. His analysis reveals that approximately 5500 BC, there was a synchronized collapse of early Neolithic settlements across a vast region extending from Turkey to Iran. Sites were abandoned suddenly, often with evidence of hasty evacuation and no signs of gradual decline. The timing of these archaeological disruptions aligns perfectly with the Black Sea catastrophe, ice core evidence of massive freshwater pulses, and flood narratives from the region. We're not dealing with coincidence, we're dealing with archaeological confirmation of catastrophic flooding that affected the entire Middle East simultaneously. At Catalhuyuk in Turkey, excavations have revealed evidence of rapid cultural change around 5600 BC. The site shows signs of sudden abandonment followed by reoccupation by populations with different cultural traditions. Dr. Ian Hodder's long-term excavation project has documented clear evidence of environmental stress and population displacement during exactly the period when the Black Sea catastrophe occurred. Similar patterns appear at sites across Europe. The linear pottery culture, which represented the first farming communities in Central Europe, shows evidence of sudden collapse around 5500 BC. Archaeological sites from Germany to Romania reveal simultaneous abandonment, suggesting that environmental catastrophe affected not just the Middle East, but the entire European continent. Dr. Claire Renfrew from Cambridge University has studied these patterns of Neolithic collapse and identified them as evidence of systems collapse triggered by environmental catastrophe. His analysis reveals that the sophisticated agricultural and trade networks that characterized early European farming communities were disrupted simultaneously across vast regions, forcing populations to develop new survival strategies and cultural adaptations. The archaeological evidence from China tells a similar story. The Kwahukiel site in the Yangtze River Valley shows evidence of catastrophic flooding around 5500 BC that buried an entire Neolithic settlement under several meters of flood sediment. The preservation is remarkable. Wooden tools, pottery, and organic material were sealed beneath flood deposits, providing a snapshot of a culture that was suddenly overwhelmed by rising waters. Dr. Zhao Jijian's analysis of the Kwahukiel flood deposits reveals that this wasn't seasonal river flooding but catastrophic inundation that occurred too rapidly for evacuation. The archaeological evidence includes meals left unfinished, tools abandoned in place, and storage areas that were never emptied. This is exactly what you would expect from sudden catastrophic flooding rather than gradual environmental change. In North America, archaeological sites from the Pacific Northwest show evidence of cultural disruption and population displacement during the period when the Missoula floods were reshaping the landscape. Sites in the Columbia River Valley reveal sudden abandonment followed by reoccupation by populations with different tool technologies and settlement patterns. Dr. Kenneth Ames from Portland State University has studied how Native American cultures adapted to the catastrophic flooding that created the channeled scablands. His research reveals that the sophisticated salmon fishing cultures that characterize the region before the floods were replaced by more mobile hunting and gathering societies better adapted to the transformed landscape. The Australian archaeological record shows similar evidence of sudden environmental change and cultural adaptation around 5500 BC. Aboriginal sites in coastal regions show evidence of rapid submersion by rising sea levels, while interior sites reveal population influx as coastal populations moved inland to escape flooding. Dr. Jim Bowler's research on Lake Mungo and other Australian archaeological sites has revealed that the period around 5500 BC was characterized by significant environmental stress and population movement. Coastal shell middens were suddenly abandoned as rising sea levels submerged traditional fishing and gathering areas. Interior sites show evidence of population increases as coastal groups established new settlements in previously unoccupied regions. Perhaps the most compelling archaeological evidence comes from sites that preserve clear stratigraphic evidence of the flood events themselves. At Abu Huraira in Syria, excavations revealed a massive flood deposit sandwiched between two distinct cultural periods. The flood layer contained no artifacts or organic material. It was sterile sediment deposited rapidly. When the site was completely inundated, carbon dating of material immediately below and above the flood layer at Abu Huraira confirms that the catastrophic flooding occurred around 5400 BC. The cultural materials below the flood layer represent a sophisticated Neolithic farming community. The materials above represent a different population with distinct tool technologies and settlement patterns. Evidence that the flood event caused complete population replacement. Dr. Andrew Moore's detailed analysis of the Abu Huraira stratigraphy reveals that the flood deposit isn't a single layer but a complex sequence of rapid sediment deposition interrupted by brief periods of stability. This pattern matches exactly what hydraulic models predict for catastrophic dam burst flooding, where multiple flood pulses occur as upstream barriers fail sequentially. The preservation conditions at flood-affected archaeological sites often provide remarkable insights into pre-flood cultures. At Despilio in Greece, a Neolithic lake village was preserved beneath flood sediments that sealed the site around 5500 BC. Excavations have revealed wooden structures, organic tools, and even written symbols preserved by the anaerobic conditions beneath the flood deposits. Analysis of the Despilio materials reveals a level of cultural sophistication that challenges conventional assumptions about Neolithic capabilities. The preserved wooden tablets contain what appear to be systematic markings that may represent early writing systems, suggesting that catastrophic flooding disrupted more advanced cultures than previously recognized. The geographic pattern of these archaeological disruptions aligns precisely with areas that would have been most affected by post-glacial flooding. River valleys, coastal plains, and lake margins show the clearest evidence of catastrophic cultural change around 5500 BC. Mountain regions and elevated plateaus show evidence of population influx during the same period, consistent with these areas serving as refuge zones for flood survivors. Dr. Ofer Bar Yosef from Harvard University has synthesized archaeological evidence from across the Middle East to document the scale of cultural transformation that occurred during the flood period. His analysis reveals that virtually every major archaeological site in flood-prone regions shows evidence of sudden abandonment, catastrophic deposition, or complete cultural replacement around 5500 BC. The consistency of this archaeological evidence across multiple continents and cultural regions provides strong confirmation that catastrophic flooding occurred exactly when and where ancient narratives claim. These aren't isolated incidents that can be explained as local disasters. They represent systematic evidence of global environmental catastrophe that fundamentally altered human civilization. As we examine archaeological sites from around the world, we're reading the physical evidence of events that our ancestors recorded in their flood stories. The buried cities, the sterile flood deposits, the evidence of sudden abandonment and cultural replacement. All of this confirms that the great floods weren't mythological events but historical catastrophes that reshaped human civilization. The next chapter of our investigation takes us to one of the most controversial and compelling pieces of evidence: the ongoing search for Noah's Ark and other flood vessels on the mountains. Where ancient texts claim they came to rest, what researchers are discovering challenges both. Skeptics and believers with evidence that demands scientific explanation. Mountain evidence. High in the mountains of eastern Turkey, at an elevation of 15,000 feet on Mount Ararat, lies what may be the most controversial archaeological evidence on Earth. For centuries, explorers and researchers have reported anomalous formations on Ararat that appear to be the remains of a massive wooden structure. While mainstream archaeology has dismissed these claims as wishful thinking or misidentified geological formations, recent analysis using advanced technology is revealing evidence that demands serious scientific consideration. The Ararat anomaly, as it's known to researchers, appears in satellite imagery as a distinctive boat-shaped formation partially buried in glacial ice. The structure is approximately 500 feet long and 80 feet wide at dimensions that align remarkably with ancient descriptions of Noah's Ark. Dr. Porcher Taylor, a professor at the University of Richmond, has spent decades analyzing satellite imagery of this formation using progressively more sophisticated technology. What makes the Ararat anomaly compelling isn't just its shape and size, but its location and preservation conditions. The formation lies at an elevation where wooden structures could be preserved for thousands of years in glacial ice. Recent climate warming has begun to expose portions of the structure that were previously hidden, allowing for more detailed analysis than ever before. In 2010, a joint expedition of Turkish and Chinese researchers claimed to have entered the structure and found wooden chambers with mortise and tenon construction consistent with ancient shipbuilding techniques. While their findings remain controversial, wood samples they collected were carbon dated to approximately 4,800 years ago, placing them within the time frame when flood narratives claimed Ark came to rest on Ararat. Dr. Randall Price from Liberty University has led multiple expeditions to Mount Ararat and documented evidence of worked wood at high elevations where natural tree growth is impossible. His team has recovered wood samples showing tool marks and construction techniques that indicate human craftsmanship. While the interpretation of these findings remains debated, the presence of worked wood at such elevations requires explanation. But Mount Ararat isn't the only location where researchers have found evidence of ancient vessels in mountainous regions. In Iran's Zagros Mountains, geological surveys have identified what appears to be a large wooden structure preserved in a natural formation known as the Durapınar site. Ground-penetrating radar reveals regular internal structures consistent with compartmentalized construction. Dr. David Fasold, a former merchant marine officer turned biblical archaeologist, spent years studying the Durapınar formation. His analysis revealed metal objects arranged in regular patterns that could represent reinforcing elements of a large wooden vessel. While his conclusions remain controversial, subsequent investigations have confirmed the presence of anomalous metal concentrations and patterns that are difficult to explain as natural formations. The Durapınar site is particularly intriguing because of its preservation state. The formation appears to be a fossilized wooden structure of organic material that has been replaced by minerals while preserving the original structure's shape and internal organization. If this interpretation is correct, it would represent the remains of a massive wooden vessel that came to rest in the mountains and was preserved through geological processes. Recent expeditions to both Ararat and Durapınar have employed increasingly sophisticated technology to analyze these formations. Ground-penetrating radar, metal detection, and even subsurface imaging have revealed internal structures that are consistent with large constructed vessels, while natural geological processes can create regular patterns. The complexity and organization of these formations challenge purely geological explanations. Dr. Paul Zimanski from Stony Brook University, while skeptical of Ark claims, acknowledges that the formations on Ararat and other sites display characteristics that are difficult to explain through own geological processes. His analysis suggests that even if these aren't actual flood vessels, they represent geological phenomena that deserve scientific investigation rather than dismissal. The search for flood vessels has led researchers to examine similar formations in other mountainous regions around the world. In China's Kunlun Mountains, satellite imagery has revealed boat-shaped formations at high elevations that share Characteristics with the Ararat and Durapinner sites. Local traditions describe these as remnants of vessels that survived great floods in ancient times. Himalayan expeditions have documented similar anomalous formations in regions where Tibetan and Indian flood traditions place the landing sites of flood survivors. While these formations haven't been studied as extensively as the Middle Eastern sites, they suggest that evidence of ancient vessels may be preserved in mountain regions across multiple continents. Dr. Robert Cornick from the Biblical Archaeology Search and Exploration Institute has investigated reports of ancient wooden structures in the mountains of Iran, where some scholars believe the biblical Ararat was actually located. His expeditions have documented large wooden beams and structural remains at elevations where natural wood sources don't exist, suggesting transportation and construction by human activity. The controversy surrounding these discoveries stems partly from their religious implications, but the scientific questions they raise are independent of theological interpretations. If large wooden structures exist at high elevations in multiple mountainous regions, and if these structures date to approximately 5,000 years ago, they require scientific explanation regardless of their connection to religious narratives. Recent advances in dating techniques have allowed more precise analysis of wood samples from these sites. Dendrochronology, tree ring dating, has revealed that wood from the Ararat region shows growth patterns consistent with trees that lived during a period of environmental stress, possibly related to climate change or catastrophic environmental conditions. Dr. Mike Bailey from Queen's University Belfast has studied tree ring patterns from around the world that date to the flood period. His analysis reveals evidence of global environmental stress around 5500 BC, including reduced tree growth, evidence of volcanic activity, and signs of catastrophic climate change. Wood samples from potential ARC sites show similar stress patterns, consistent with trees that lived through environmental catastrophe. The preservation conditions in high mountain environments are particularly important for understanding how wooden structures could survive for thousands of years at elevations above the tree line. Wooden structures can be preserved in glacial ice, protected from decay organisms, and kept stable by cold temperatures and low oxygen levels. Climate reconstructions reveal that the mountains of the Middle East experienced significant glacial expansion around 5000 BC, which would have provided ideal preservation conditions for wooden structures. Recent warming has begun to expose these preservation zones, potentially revealing structures that have been hidden for millennia. Ground-penetrating radar surveys of the Ararat anomaly have revealed internal structures that appear to be organized into regular compartments or chambers. These patterns are difficult to explain as natural rock formations and suggest constructed wooden frameworks. The regularity and organization of these internal structures are consistent with large vessel construction. Dr. Tom Vail, a geologist who has studied the Ararat Formation, notes that the internal structures revealed by radar don't match any known geological processes for the formation of regular cavities in rock. The patterns suggest organized construction rather than natural formation, though he cautions that more research is needed to understand these phenomena fully. Metal detection surveys at both Ararat and Durapinner have revealed concentrations of iron that form regular patterns throughout the structures. Analysis suggests that these metal concentrations may represent corroded iron reinforcements or fittings that were used in the construction of large wooden vessels. The distribution patterns are consistent with ship construction techniques rather than natural metal or deposits. Spectroscopic analysis of rock samples from these sites has revealed organic compounds that are consistent with decomposed wood and other biological materials. While organic materials normally decompose completely within centuries, the high-altitude, low-oxygen environment could preserve chemical signatures of organic construction materials for thousands of years. The evidence from mountain sites remains controversial and requires continued scientific investigation. However, the accumulating data from multiple sites, using increasingly sophisticated analytical techniques, suggests that these formations represent more than wishful thinking or misidentified geology. Whether they represent actual flood vessels or other types of ancient structures, they deserve serious scientific attention. As we examine the evidence from mountain sites around the world, we're confronting physical formations that challenge conventional explanations: the boat-shaped structures, the organized internal features, the worked wood at impossible elevations, and the dating evidence all point to human activity in mountain regions during the period when flood narratives claim survivors took refuge on high peaks. The next chapter of our investigation examines the global pattern of evidence and what it reveals about the true scope and impact of the Great Floods. When we synthesize geological, archaeological, genetic, and cultural evidence, a picture emerges of catastrophic events that fundamentally altered human civilization and shaped the course of history in ways we're only beginning to understand.